So you knew we'd get back into trig eventually, so now we have some trig limits. Just like the other limits, you're just going to plug it in and see what you get. So for the first one, I'm asking you the cosine of pi over 3. I know that pi over 3 is in the first quadrant, so I know that my result will be positive. I just have to know what the value is. Okay, so when I'm finding the value of this one, I can use my unit circles or my triangles, my chart, however I want to try that. Of course, you know I prefer the triangles. So pi over 3 is actually 60 degrees. So the ratios there that I've memorized are 1, 2, and the square root of 3. The square root of 3 is always opposite the biggest angle, which is 60 here. Remember, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So here's my adjacent right here with a 1 over hypotenuse is 2. My answer would be a positive 1/2. Okay, and that's how that one would go. Hey, my second one is very tricky, actually. Didn't mean to put the tricky one so early in the lesson, but here we go. The first thing I notice is the angle is pi over 2. Well, pi over 2 is a quadrantal angle. Okay, remember what I mean by that is it's on the unit circle actually right here. Here's where pi over 2 would be located. So I don't actually use triangles for that. I use the unit circle. So at pi over 2, my values for sine and cosine are 0, 1, because I go over 0 and up 1. Now, when I get ready to do the tangent, remember tangent is sine x over cosine x. So in this particular case, sine is 1 and cosine is 0. Now, that's a problem. That's case 3. Earlier in this lesson, I gave you a sheet and it says you have 3 cases of limits. Plug in and get an answer. Easy. Like we did at the top here with cosine of pi over 3. The second case was plug in and get 0 over 0, which was do more work. And your third case is a number over 0. Now remember here you have 3 options. It's either going to be positive infinity, negative infinity, or does not exist. Basically here, we're going to be looking at the SIGN, the sign. Now you're welcome to graph out the tangent if you want to, but I won't make you ever graph out the tangent. So here's what I do. I need to know what happens to the tangent as we approach pi over 2. Let's think about it for a second. As I'm approaching pi over 2, I'm in this quadrant. And what you know about this quadrant is that everything is positive. So technically, from this side here, I'm approaching positive infinity. Now, that's what happens in the first quadrant. As I'm approaching pi over 2 from this direction, remember I'm talking about the tangent in this quadrant, the tangent in this second quadrant, quadrant 2, is negative. So that means on this side of the tangent, I would have a negative value. So what you notice here is they do not meet. On one side of pi over 2, the tangent's positive. On the second side of pi over 2, the tangent's negative. Since they do not meet, your answer is does not exist. Now, if you'd rather see it graphically, let me see if I can draw it real fast graphically. Here is pi over 2, and here is pi, and tangent goes like this. Okay, let's try this again. So you have an asymptote at pi over 2. The tangent at 0 is 0. And so it makes this particular swoop. So you'll see on this side, the left side of pi over 2, the graph is going upward to positive infinity. On this right side of pi over 2, the graph is going downward to negative infinity. You'll see that they do not meet. and that's why it does not exist. Okay, so let's go to a couple that are a little bit easier than this one. So for my next one, I asked you the sine, basically the sine of 5 pi over 2. That's not 5 pi over 2, sorry about that. The sine of 5 pi over 4. First of all, I need to know where it's located. Well, we're talking about pi over 4s. So here's pi right here. So in terms of fourths, 1 whole pi is 4/4 pi. So if I'm looking for 5/4 pi, I'm going to be in this quadrant here. In this quadrant here, quadrant 3, the sign is negative. All students take calculus. The only thing positive here is tangent, and it's reciprocal. So we have a negative result. The next thing I notice is that I'm at a pi over 4 reference angle. So pi over 4 reference angle is 45 degrees. And the ratio of 45 degrees is 1, 1, and the square root of 2. Okay? So when I get ready to do this one, I'm going to say it's opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over hypotenuse. Now, that's your answer, and that's how it would work. For those of you using the unit circle, if you use the unit circle on this one, you're going to get this answer. That is a great answer too. There's nothing wrong with it. However, in my multiple choice quiz, my denominator's not rationalized. So if you have trouble and you said, I can't find my answer on there, look to make sure it's not rationalized. Both of those mean the same thing, but only one of them would be an answer choice. Okay, let's look at our last one. Okay, for our last one, I'm going to plug in 0. The tangent of 0 is 0. The sine of 0 is 0. So here we get 0 over 0, which means do more work. So, remember, do more work is factor or rationalize. In trig world, it's simplify the trig expression. So here we go. In order to simplify this trig expression, I'm going to turn everything into sines and cosines. So remember, the tangent is sine over cosine. And then you have a sign in the bottom. Okay, so let's fix this complex fraction. So it's sine of x over cosine of x. I'm going to divide by the sine of x. Okay, so that's just rewriting that fraction in a different form. So when I do that, I keep and I change and I flip. Remember, when you're dividing two fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second. We also label that sometimes as keep, change, and flip. Okay, so when I keep, change, and flip, I see the signs cross out. I get the limit as x goes to 0 of 1 over the cosine of x. Okay, now that's a much more usable form. If I plug in 0, I get 1 over the cosine of 0. Okay, now that's back at a quadrantal angle. Okay, here's my angle 0. That's the point 1, 0. So what I notice about that is the cosine is 1. What I notice about that, the cosine at 0 is 1, and so that would be 1 over 1, and that is your answer.